Every night, at exactly 10:13 p.m., an old man named George would part the curtains of his window and stare across the street. He was quiet, unassuming, and had lived alone for years in the small apartment building. To his neighbors, George was little more than a shadow, a man who existed in the background of their lives. One day, George disappeared. At first, nobody noticed. His absence blended into the rhythm of the neighborhood, a place where people kept to themselves. But Emma, a young woman living directly across from George, found herself growing uneasy. She had always noticed George's nightly ritual, the way he would peek out from behind his floral curtains at the same time every evening. It was odd, yes, but harmless, until it stopped. 3 days after George vanished, Emma found a note slipped under her door. It was written in shaky, uneven letters. "Do not look at the windows after dark." Emma stared at the note, her heart pounding. She glanced around the hallway, but it was empty. She considered throwing it away, dismissing it as a prank, but something about the words lingered in her mind. That night, as she sat in her dimly lit apartment, her eyes kept drifting to George's window. The curtains were closed, the apartment dark. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her. The next morning, Emma mentioned George's disappearance to the landlord, a gruff man named Mr. Harris. "George? He probably went to visit family," Mr. Harris said with a shrug. "Old man's got a niece somewhere out of town." Emma frowned. She had never seen anyone visit George. His mailbox was always stuffed with unopened letters. Family didn't seem likely, but she let it go. Maybe he'd just needed a break. Another note arrived the following night, this time taped to the outside of her window. Emma's breath caught as she peeled it off. The message was even stranger. "They're watching. Don't let them see you look back." The unease that had been simmering for days boiled over into fear. Who was sending these notes? And what did they mean? Emma's hands trembled as she locked every window and door in her apartment. That night, she left the lights on and tried to convince herself it was all a coincidence. But as the clock struck midnight, a soft tapping sound broke the silence. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder, more insistent. Emma froze, her eyes darting to the window. The curtains in George's apartment were open. A shadowy figure stood there, staring directly at her. Emma's stomach churned. The figure didn't move, its outline blurry and indistinct. She couldn't make out a face, only the hollow shape of a person. Then slowly, it raised a hand and pointed at her. She stumbled backward, her heart racing. The tapping continued, but now it seemed to come from all around her. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. Emma pressed her hands over her ears, trying to block out the noise. Finally, it stopped, leaving behind an oppressive silence. The following day, Emma decided to confront Mr. Harris again. "I think something's wrong in George's apartment," she said, her voice shaking. Mr. Harris frowned. "What do you mean?" "I saw someone in his window last night," Emma said, "and I keep getting these notes." Mr. Harris's face darkened. "Don't go near that apartment," he said firmly. "George wasn't, well, let's just say he wasn't the easiest tenant. Best to leave it alone." Emma pressed him for more, but he refused to say anything else. Frustrated and frightened, she decided to investigate on her own. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma crept into the hallway and stood outside George's door. It was slightly ajar. She hesitated, then pushed it open. The apartment was cold and dark, the air heavy with a metallic scent. Emma stepped inside, her shoes crunching on something scattered across the floor. She flicked on her phone's flashlight and gasped. The walls were covered in scribbled messages, the same shaky handwriting as the notes she had received. Phrases like, "Don't look back," "Stay away from the windows," and "They see everything," filled every inch of the space. In the center of the room, an old armchair faced the window. On the seat was a notebook, its pages filled with frantic sketches of shadowy figures with hollow eyes. Emma's hands shook as she flipped through the drawings. One of them depicted a figure standing at a window, her window. Suddenly, a low humming noise filled the room. Emma whipped around, her flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. The window's curtains fluttered, though there was no breeze. A shadow moved past the glass, and the humming grew louder, almost deafening. Emma bolted from the apartment, slamming the door behind her. She didn't stop running until she was back in her own unit, every lock secured. She spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of her bedroom, the lights on, her eyes fixed on the door. By morning, she had made up her mind to leave. Whatever was happening in that building, she wanted no part of it. As she packed her belongings, she glanced one last time at George's window. The curtains were open, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw his face staring back at her. Emma left that same day, vowing never to return. But even miles away, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. A week later, a final note arrived at her new address. It read, "You can leave, but they never forget. Keep your curtains closed."